Before its release, Resident Evil 5 was anticipated as a return to the survival horror roots of the series, while also incorporating the successful gameplay model of its predecessor, Resident Evil 4. It was teased to fans that many developers who worked on the original Resident Evil were involved in RE5's development, leading fans to expect a game that retained the horror themes while refining the action-oriented controls and camera. According to statements from producer Jun Takeuchi, the intention was to blend the gameplay mechanics of Resident Evil 4 with the thematic elements of the original Resident Evil. It seemed like Capcom was teasing a return to a more horror-focused experience while retaining the innovations of its predecessor. However, we all know when Resident Evil 5 was released, it became apparent that the game had shifted away from survival horror entirely. Instead, it embraced a straightforward action shooter approach. This departure was disappointing, to say the least, especially for fans who expected a blend of horror and action. And if you compare it to other action shooters of the time, Resident Evil 5 is really just a subpar game. And the game's biggest issue is this identity crisis it had. The game has no fucking idea what it wants to be. It neither fully embraces horror, nor does it excel as an action game. This identity crisis was so traumatizing that it infected the series for the next 6 years. But there are a ton of other issues with this game because this isn't just a case of fans upset that RE5 was an action shooter rather than a horror game. It's, if the game had been an amazing action shooter, I wouldn't be making this video. But before we dive into all the issues with Resident Evil 5, let's just take a step back. Because when Resident Evil 5 began production, Capcom was at an all-time high with the release of Resident Evil 4, a game still cited to this day as one of the best games ever made. The game sold well, it was well received by fans, it won many Game of the Year awards, so how did Capcom stray so far off course with Resident Evil 5? Well, during Resident Evil 5's development, two notable games were released. Those games were Gears of War and Call of Duty for Modern Warfare. And let's just look at some sales figures real quick. So I think it's pretty obvious what happened here. These games both sold a lot better than Resident Evil 4. And a bunch of marketing people and executives were sitting around the table and they said, well, how come our game is so good? People say our game is one of the best games ever made, but we can't make this kind of money. Why don't we just do what those other games do? No problem. We can still have our game, but just add in all the stuff that people like about those games, and let's grow them profits. It'll be no problem. And from the very beginning of the game, the Call of Duty and Gears of War influence are very apparent. You're shown these cutscenes of military vehicles and military personnel with this stereotypical war movie music going on. And Chris Redfield has completely transformed into Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War. Besides the overall look, the military theme, certain mechanics, there was another big thing these games had that prior Resident Evil games did not, and that is the social element. Even though many people who played prior Resident Evil games, myself included, did so many times playing with a friend, but you weren't actually able to play together in-game, but, Capcom wanted that Call of Duty social cash, baby. So, some point, online co-op was added to the game, and the game was designed around having a co-op partner. And if you wanted to play the game alone, you are forced to play with an AI ally, which is one of the worst experiences in gaming that anyone can have, but we're going to look at that in a second. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. So before the game was released, Takeuchi also stated the game's enemies would possess human-like intelligence and awareness. And this is really funny in hindsight because I'm not actually sure the enemies are actually any smarter than the enemies in the original Resident Evil game. And Resident Evil 5 at this point had a pretty big and loyal fan base. So no matter what, the fans were going to buy Resident Evil 5. Capcom most likely knew this and decided, fuck the fans. We want those juicy Call of Duty wallets.
This is insane!
You ever get the feeling you're expendable?
Well, at the end of the day, if Resident Evil 5 had been released and was an amazing action title, I wouldn't be making this video, but Resident Evil 5 fails as both a horror game and an action game really hard. So that's enough backstory. Let's dive into the actual game. The setting for this game, on paper at least, has to be one of the worst ideas for a horror game you could think of. The game takes place in a poor part of Africa while it's mostly outside during the bright-ass daytime. The environments are littered with bland, uninteresting items. While the games of the past always had beautiful and often haunting decorations that you could just stop and look at, this game has like some shitty brown boxes and connexes and metal walls and a bunch of sand on the ground, you know, like typical military shooter game stuff. And you can easily see how the levels of Resident Evil 5 could be swapped in for Call of Duty levels. I'm not saying a horror game can't be done outside during the day. I'm sure it could and still be scary, but it's a lot harder to pull off, and Resident Evil 5 does not pull it off. And this game, right away, it feels like when you first get into the actual game, it has this feeling about it that it was like designed by people who hate Resident Evil games. Like you come across the first locked door in the game, and a focus on doors and locked doors has been a staple of Resident Evil since the original, but here it's like, what the fuck, bro? You need to find a key to open a door? Now fuck that shit, I just kicked the door down. Yeah, bro, that's what I'm talking about. And you'll notice pretty quickly that inventory management that has been popular and a staple since the original game is gone, which was really surprising to me because the inventory system in Resident Evil 4 works so well. It was like a fun little mini game in and of itself. Now you just have a set of 9 slots that are used for ammo and guns because you don't really store objects or key items or anything like that. The few times you do have to pick up key items, they don't take up an inventory slot. But yeah, you won't really have to ever manage this inventory. I mean, you might have to drop some excess ammo every now and then because you won't ever run out of ammo because ammo is fucking everywhere. And there's a good reason for that. You will be doing a fuck ton of shooting, as the enemies are all bullet sponges. Bigger enemies will take so much ammo to take down, it's comical. In prior Resident Evil games, you sometimes weren't sure when you were going to find more ammo, like finding a box of shotgun shells in the earlier games, especially in harder difficulties, was like a gift from God. This was just part of the survival horror experience that Resident Evil was known for, which is now long gone. There's no merchant either. Instead, you just buy and sell items from a menu in between levels. It's almost like some sort of pseudo menu from a multiplayer game. Like, I don't know, it's fucking weird and doesn't really make sense in context of the game. Just like in Resident Evil 4, you still cannot move and shoot at the same time. The player must be stopped to fire their gun. And this is part of that identity crisis I was talking about, because the game wants to be a full-out action shooter game. But the enemy encounters are designed so that enemies move really fast, and you are constantly running. So it often feels like none of the encounters are designed around the fact that the player cannot move and shoot. It's just really fucking bad. And in Resident Evil 4, this worked great because the enemies always moved slowly to the player. You had to quickly decide whether you should stop and fire, or run away and try and get better positioning on the enemies. Here, enemies sprint, but then sometimes will just randomly stop and walk at a snail's pace before randomly running again. It's just like, what the fuck? And just looking at the game, the way it's presented, I mean, it looks like Chris should be able to move and shoot. Like he's supposed to be this tactical military guy, but he can't fucking walk and shoot his gun at the same time? The game wants to be an action shooter game, but fails at the most basic aspect of action shooter games, shooting. And speaking of basic aspects of game design, let's talk about the movement in this game, because it's fucking awful. Like, if you want to move at a diagonal, instead of the character turning towards that diagonal, they instead Michael Jackson moonwalk in the direction. It just looks so bad, and it feels so bad. And I'm not sure what the deal is with the sprinting in this game. Like, they tried to add in some sort of shitty version of the Gears of War sprint where you can't really turn sharply while in full sprint. I'm not really sure. It just feels like shit. And it's so hard to turn the character, not only while sprinting, but just in general. And the controls themselves are just god-awful. On a controller, you're given 4 different control schemes to pick from, and they're all just so fucking bad. It might actually take you some time to get used to the controls if you try to play this. But before I dive into any more gameplay, I have to talk about the co-op aspect of this game. I mentioned earlier how this game was designed for co-op, at least at some point in development, because it was not shown in the E3 trailer, yet on release, co-op was a mandatory part of the game. But, so co-op immediately destroys any sort of horror vibe, as isolation is a big thing in horror games, as well as prior Resident Evil games. I mean, being alone makes you feel vulnerable, and when you're vulnerable, you are afraid, and the vulnerability is gone in Resident Evil 5. Always having a person with you, whether it's the AI partner or a human, throughout the entire game removes all sense of survival horror. If a big scary monster is walking at you, no need to think about where to position next. Just start running, let your co-op partner take care of it, and vice versa. Running low on healing items? Don't worry, your partner will heal you. I mean, there aren't many games that are scary when it's you and a friend playing together. And while co-op destroying any sort of horror element is a pretty big problem, it's not even close to the biggest problem co-op brings to this game. The main issue is the AI partner that you are forced to play with if you choose to not play with an online friend. The game forces you to play with an AI character, as the whole game was designed around there being 2 players, and playing with this AI is one of the most frustrating experiences that anyone can have. I'm sure this topic itself could be its own entire video, so I'll try not to stay on this subject too long, but the AI Sheva is terrible. While I'm sure creating an AI partner like this that is with the player the entire game is difficult, but that does not justify the suffering that you will endure on her behalf. If you or Sheva die, then the game is over and you have to restart from your checkpoint. So you are always at the mercy of the AI, and there is not much mercy going around here. Boss fights in this game will make you want to shove your face into a blender, as Sheva constantly runs up to these bosses to get killed over and over again. Enemies, basic enemies, will kill her over and over again. There are even enemies in this game where they will one-shot you if you get too close to them. They grab you and stab you and kill you and it's over. And she will get killed by these enemies all the fucking time. She will get you killed over and over. This game is set up so there are areas where you need to use teamwork to get through certain spots, which is a cool idea, but sadly, these areas are way too simple when playing with a human, and if you're playing with the AI, it can be a daunting task to get her to do the most basic things. For example, here one of the players needs to hold this lever to lower the bridge while the other player crosses. So I tell her to hold the bridge lever, and as soon as I'm on the bridge crossing, she decides to let go of the lever, causing me to die. So next attempt, I decide I will hold the lever. I pull the lever and she should go across the bridge. Instead, she apparently just runs back and forth in the area right behind me while she gets killed, instead of just running down the straight path to the bridge. And this is just some typical shit that this is what it's like to play this game. I thought this area was designed really well. You're supposed to turn 3 valves to turn the fire off in order to continue forward. But in order to get to the valves, you need to activate some zip lines. And as you're doing this, these chainsaw guys are chasing you. And they are, of course, bullet sponges that take minutes of nonstop shooting to kill. So you can just lead them around. I mean, I think what the designers intended was you would lead them to one side of the map, hop on the zip line, zip on down, so you can turn the valve without getting killed by the chainsaw, who, if they get to you, will kill you in one shot. Well, Sheva just does whatever the fuck she wants. And the chainsaw guys just kill her in one shot. I mean, this part of the game made me want to pour bleach into my eyeballs. I was seriously getting pissed because there's nothing you as the player can do about it. You cannot do anything. You are at the mercy of this AI to not get herself killed by stupid shit. And because of the way it's set up where I have to zip line down to one side, no matter what I tell her, she's going to either follow me to where I go to the zip line, or she's going to try to follow me to where I end from the zip line. So at some point, she's going to cross with the chainsaw guy. And holy fucking shit, it's just infuriating. It is just the most frustrating fucking thing. And every time she dies, you have to redo this whole fucking area. You have to re-kill all these bullet sponge enemies that take fucking forever to die. You have to do all this fucking work. You can set it up perfect just for her to run straight into the chainsaw guy for him to kill her in one shot. And it's just like, Jesus fucking Christ. And you can't even play this game slow and try to soak up the atmosphere if you wanted to. Because Sheva's just going to get in your way and she's going to fuck it all up. I mean, look at these clips. Here, I'm trying to play slow. And I'm trying to enjoy the game and, really get into the atmosphere. And it's like, how can you do that when Sheva's just doing whatever the fuck this is? It's just fuck, man. I mean, look at this. I'm here in this creepy fucking village. I'm trying to soak up some atmosphere. Like, look at this fucked up corpse. I'm going to, slowly walk around, really get a feel for this creepy place. Like, there is this film over the game that you can never actually get immersed because you're always having to deal with this shit. I mean, you have 2 commands you can give her, attack and cover. Neither of these really do anything. Cover kind of calls her over to where you are, and sometimes she might listen to you, sometimes she won't. Sometimes she will break boxes on her own and grabs items. I don't fucking know what the fuck she does, really. I think this clip from the last boss actually sums up what it's like to play this game pretty fucking good. So check this out. When talking to people IRL and online about Resident Evil 5, it seems that the group of players that actually liked this game liked it solely because they were able to play with their friend in co-op, which the fun was probably had because they were doing an activity with their friend and fun happened naturally, not really due to the game. But while co-op play can be enjoyable, a game's quality should not solely depend on its multiplayer mode. I mean, the convoluted story, the characters, the gameplay, it all just suffers way too much because of the co-op. And just because a game is co-op does not mean it will be better. I think just the idea of like the co-op Resident Evil was more alluring than how it actually played out. When I told my friend Poonthrax that I was going to make a video on Resident Evil 5, I asked him what he thought about the game, and he told me this story. Quote, "This game I'll never forget when it came out, because I didn't play Resident Evil 4 when it launched, since it was on GameCube, and I just never got the chance. And I remember when Resident Evil 5 came out, I was thinking, oh my god, no way, sick, how cool, co-op Resident Evil. Then I played the game with my best friend. And in the middle of the game, it was like in a moment when we suddenly realized that co-op doesn't mean better." End quote. And yeah, if you don't have anyone to play with you through this game, you are going to have a real bad time. Because the whole game you will be stuck with the AI partner and you will be fucked. And remember that word partner, because Capcom really tried to sell the co-op aspect of these games. In fact, Resident Evil 5 is the start of this really weird fixation of the word partner. Like they were really trying to rebrand the series as the Partner series or some shit.
We were partners.
Thanks, partner.
But now that your partner has arrived,
Ready, partner?
You'll be needing a partner, right?
We're partners. To the end. I thought they were partners.
Like I received some intel that my old partner was still alive. At first,
Chris, you're the only one who can. Before it's too late. Don't you trust your partner?
The game opens up with a sequence that tries to be like Resident Evil 4's first little village sequence. So right away, Resident Evil 5 is already saying it's not original. And it also shows right away just how poor the game is designed in terms of movement, shooting, the uninspired environment. This looks like a level from Modern Warfare. Hell, I think 90% of this game looks like something that could be in a Call of Duty game. Sad how quickly a series can lose its identity to greed. And so after running around this area for some time, Chris finally gets a big kill streak and calls in his Apache helicopter. You go on to fight more of these parasite-infected enemies that look like dudes in t-shirts. I mean, there's nothing scary or cool looking about these guys at all. Sometimes, like, a big parasite might come out of their head, but, like, I don't know, the enemy design's just so boring to me. It's also this game where the series story truly becomes over-convoluted as well as over-the-top. There's all sorts of agencies and organizations and viruses and parasites that it all just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. It tries to go deeper, but somehow ends up being extremely shallow. And then we have Wesker, the main villain, who is now just a cliche of the bad guy who wants to end the world. It's like he's a supervillain or something out of a Marvel movie. How exciting. And speaking of over-the-top action, Chris can punch enemies' heads off now, while Sheva can do like insane backflip kicks and shit. It's just so ridiculous. I mean, it's like you shoot an enemy point blank with a 12-gauge shotgun just in order to stun them so you can punch their head off. Like, what the fuck? And the AI of the enemies in this game is fucking terrible. They don't really do anything but run around. Sometimes they walk around. They just kind of walk at the player. They're really uninteresting to fight. They seem like they don't really react to anything until they're dead. They kind of, a lot of times, just ignore the player. Like this guy right here. Like, what the fuck? And then in a lot of sequences, when there's supposed to be like a bunch of action and these big hordes of enemies, you can just run right by the enemies. And they don't even really react to you at all. It's just like, I don't know, it's just really fucking shitty. And I mean, the combat gameplay loop in this is just fucking awful. You just kind of shoot enemies and punch them, but you don't really have to, like, do anything. And I mean, look at these dudes. They're just like dudes in jeans and a t-shirt. Like, what the fuck, man? You know, like, the villagers in Resident Evil 4 had a really creepy vibe to them because people were expecting zombies, and these villagers, they weren't zombies, but there was something definitely wrong with them, and they were so, like, backwoods that it was just, like, creepy. But the enemies in this game, it's like just dudes in jeans and t-shirts walking at you with, like, a machete. Like, what the fuck? It's not, like, scary. It's not fun. It's not action. I don't know what the fuck it is. These enemies are also bullet sponges. I mean, sponge isn't really a good word. More like bullet black holes. The amount you have to fucking shoot these guys for them to die is just ridiculous. Obviously, in Capcom's attempt to make the game more action-oriented, they decided to make it so enemies just take an insane amount of bullets to die, which the game also is trying to go for, like, this realistic military vibe, so that doesn't really work. Like, I don't know. The game, it just doesn't know what the fuck it wants to be. Is it a horror game? Is it an action shooter game? Is it this realistic military experience in a horror kind of world? Like, I don't know what the fuck it was going for. They didn't know what the fuck they were going for. You also have a cover system in the game, but it's, like, really shitty and doesn't really work that good. You just kind of run up to a wall or a little wall in front of you, and you can crouch behind it, or you can stand up on a wall and peek around the corner. You can't move. You can't, like, compared to Gears of War, which I believe came out 4 years earlier than this game, you can't really do much. You can just take cover and peek and shoot, and that's it. But it's like there's times you have to do it because you're getting shot at by, like, a massive machine gun. It's just really fucking shitty. I don't know. It feels like they just shoved it in there because they thought that's what players wanted. And then early on in the game, you get hit with this retarded fucking cutscene. And yes, I said retard, and yes, it's not politically correct. I don't give a fuck. Because that's what this is. It's retarded. The enemies surround Chris and Sheva here, and suddenly it's zombies on motorcycles. Well, I guess they're not zombies. They're infected with a parasite, but I'm just going to call them zombies. Zombies on motorcycles. Yeah. Won't the fucking bros just love this shit? Like, bro, and he gets hooked by the chain. He's getting dragged. Like, this looks like something straight out of the Resident Evil movies. Like, that might actually be in one of the movies. I'm not sure, but it's just fucking awful. Like, what? Why are they on motorcycles? What the fuck? Oh my god, oh my god, it's so bad. Like, you get to some boss fights, and the boss fights are just so fucking bad, too. Like, the normal enemies are bullet sponges, but holy fucking shit are these bosses. The most bullet spongy boss I've ever seen in any game ever. And the fights aren't really fun. They're designed so that you're gonna run out of fucking ammo. I don't know. And they're not, like, hard. You just gotta stay alive and pray to God Sheva doesn't fucking die, which she most likely will. I highly doubt you're gonna one-shot any boss in this game without her dying or getting you killed. So after that terrible boss fight, you're then thrown into this scripted sequence where you're on the back of a military vehicle with a machine gun shooting at zombies on motorcycles. And it's like, what the fuck, man? They just really wanted some sort of a modern warfare vibe, you know? And it's just so bad. Like, it's not fun. It's fucking stupid. And at this point, I think most fans of the game were just like, fuck. Or most fans of the series were just like, shit. Like, guess they can't all be winners, you know? And this really was just another game that was Call of Duty-anized. And this happened to a lot of games back then. But man, this one was brutal. Like, this shit's just so stupid. And it goes on for so long. It's like, please fucking end. Let me off the back of this goddamn Humvee or whatever the fuck. Go from shooting the dudes on motorcycles to one of the stupidest boss fights I've ever seen. It's like, look at this thing. Like, this is beyond a bullet sponge. The game wants to be this modern-day military shooter, but look how many fucking bullets it takes to kill this thing. Like, it's just insane. Like, if this was any sort of realism at all, that dude would be turned into just nothing but a red mist. It doesn't fucking matter how fast the parasites can heal its body. There would be no parasites. There would be nothing. I mean, it's getting lit up by 2 fucking machine guns. I'm pretty sure the gun Shev is shooting is a minigun, like one that you would find attached to a helicopter. Like, there would be nothing left of this thing. It would just be a fucking red mist. And this thought is going to go through your head while you're doing it. Like, how many bullets does this shit take? Like, it's fucking stupid, man. And I'm all, you know, Resident Evil's always been a little bit cheesy. And a little bit of cheese is great, but this ain't cheesy. This is just shit. And, like, just look at the fight. Don't even think about the bullet sponge shit. Even without that, it's just like a terribly designed fight. Nothing happens like, oh, duck. Keep shooting. Just shoot and duck. Wow. I mean, that's fucking really exciting. That's a lot of awesome action, isn't it? And it's not. And that's the problem. The game's not a horror game, and the action in it is just shit. I mean, if you compare this to Gears of War, like, Gears just blows it out of the fucking water. I mean, this sequence right here looks like it could be something out of Call of Duty. Like, you get these highly scripted events that happen. But it's like not good. And then you also have these really, really shitty scripted events happen where it's this one, when you're in a temple, you step on one little pressure plate and it causes the whole fucking building to collapse. Like, what the fuck is this? Indiana Jones? Oh, and here's some interesting... This boss fight was really interesting to say the least. You know, I'm kind of surprised Gears of War didn't get their lawyers on this one. I mean, all the Gears fans, you know, everybody loves the Hammer of Dawn. It's a pretty cool fucking weapon, you know. Satellite, call down a giant fucking laser on your enemy. Well, you know, they just kind of threw that one in here. In this boss fight, just out of nowhere. Doesn't really have any context either. Like, you're on a ship, I guess. I don't know why a ship would just have this weapon that causes a satellite to target with a laser, but, you know, Gears of War. The Gears of War fans will love it, so throw it in there. It's fucking stupid. About halfway through the game, you come across the zombies with guns. And it's not fun to fight these guys. Because they're bullet sponges and their AI sucks. And they just kind of stand there with their guns shooting at you. And you gotta use the shitty cover system to shoot back at them. And god damn it, it is fucking awful. One thing I thought was interesting and kind of cool about this game was how they tied in the backstory of Umbrella finding the flowers in Africa, and, you know, like the idea of a zombie first started from like Africa. So I thought that was really neat how they tied it all together in this, but you know, the 15 seconds of coolness that this brings to the table doesn't outweigh the other 8 hours of bullshit. This game did not age well at all. I mean, I thought it was shit when it came out, and replaying it for this video, I can confirm it is indeed shit, and it was way worse than I fucking remembered. Like I said, this identity crisis that Resident Evil went through starting with this game, it really did affect the series for a long time. This is part 1 of a 4-video series of the worst era of Resident Evil. So next up, I'll be looking at Resident Evil Revelations 1, so keep an eye out for that one. Anyway, this has been David with Consternation Evolved. Thanks for watching.
So, you've made it this far. Too bad you won't make it much further.